I found the bag of de-icing chemicals missing from my garage on a Tuesday morning, and within 48 hours, my entire life became a legal nightmare that would eventually land the president of our homeowners association in federal custody. My name is Stephen Thornton, and I've lived in the Meadowbrook Estates subdivision in Columbus, Ohio, for about 3 years now. It's one of those cookie-cutter developments where every house looks almost identical. The lawns are measured for grass height compliance, and the HOA has more rules than the IRS tax code. I'm a logistics coordinator for a shipping company, unmarried, and generally keep to myself. I bought the place because it was affordable and close to work, not because I wanted to join some suburban social club. The chemicals in question weren't your typical grocery store de-icer. I work with a lot of industrial suppliers through my job, and last winter I'd gotten a great deal on some commercial-grade calcium chloride compound mixed with some other additives that made it incredibly effective at melting ice, even in sub-zero temperatures. The stuff came in these industrial-sized containers, about 5 gallons each, and I'd stored 3 of them in my garage after using one throughout the previous winter season. That Tuesday morning in late November, I was getting ready for another potential freeze. The weather forecast called for freezing rain, and I wanted to pre-treat my driveway and walkway. I went to grab one of those containers and found all 3 missing. At first, I thought maybe I'd moved them and forgotten, but after searching my entire garage twice, reality set in. Someone had taken them. I stepped outside to check if maybe I'd left them on the driveway or something equally stupid. That's when I saw Deborah Patterson, our HOA president, walking down the street in her typical outfit of expensive athleisure wear and designer sunglasses, despite the overcast sky. Deborah was 52 years old, never worked an actual job as far as anyone could tell, and treated the HOA presidency like she was running a small dictatorship. She had that specific haircut, you know, the one, short and aggressively styled with blonde highlights that probably cost more than my monthly car payment. "Stephen," she called out, changing course to approach my driveway. "I need to talk to you about those chemicals you've been storing." My stomach dropped. "What about them?" "I confiscated them yesterday afternoon. Your garage door was open and I could clearly see those containers. Do you have any idea how dangerous those substances are? This is a family neighborhood." I stared at her, trying to process what she just admitted to. "You went into my garage and took my property. As HOA president, I have the authority to remove hazardous materials that pose a threat to the community. It's in Section 12, Paragraph 4 of the bylaws." I'd read those bylaws when I bought the house. Section 12 covered architectural modifications and lawn maintenance. There was nothing about entering someone's property and confiscating things. "Deborah, that's not what that section says, and you know it. You just admitted to theft." Her face hardened into that expression I'd seen her use on other neighbors who dared question her authority. "It's not theft when I'm protecting the community. Those chemicals are industrial-grade hazardous waste. I've already contacted the EPA to report your improper storage of dangerous substances. You called the EPA on me for storing de-icer in my garage. They need to be properly disposed of. I've secured them in a safe location pending their investigation." I felt my blood pressure rising. "Where are they, Deborah? That's none of your concern now. The matter is being handled appropriately." She pulled out her phone and tapped at the screen. "In fact, I'm documenting this conversation. Your hostility is noted." "My hostility? You stole from me and you're calling the EPA because I have de-icer. Do you realize how insane that sounds?" "Watch your tone, Stephen. I can issue a fine for verbal harassment of board members. I took a deep breath, trying to calm down. Just tell me where my property is so I can retrieve it. As I said, it's been secured. You'll be receiving a formal violation notice by the end of the week. I suggest you familiarize yourself with Sections 15 and 22 regarding hazardous materials and proper storage protocols. She walked away before I could respond, leaving me standing in my driveway wondering if I was losing my mind. I went back inside and immediately pulled up the HOA bylaws on my computer. I read every single section. Nowhere, absolutely nowhere, was there any mention of hazardous materials, EPA regulations, or authority to enter someone's property and remove items. I called my neighbor, Rick Davidson, who'd had his own run-ins with Deborah over the years. He answered on the second ring. "Rick, it's Steven. Did you see anyone at my house yesterday afternoon?" "Yeah, actually. I saw Deborah's car in your driveway around 3. "Why? How long was she there?" "Maybe 15, 20 minutes. I figured you were having some HOA meeting or something. What's going on?" I explained the situation. Rick let out a low whistle. "Man, she's finally gone completely off the rails. You need to call the police." "And say what? The HOA president stole my de-icer." "That's exactly what you say. It's theft, doesn't matter if she's HOA president or the Queen of England." Rick had a point. I called the Columbus Police Department non-emergency line and explained the situation. The dispatcher sounded skeptical, but said she'd send an officer to take a report. Officer Chen arrived about 40 minutes later. He was a middle-aged Asian man with a patient demeanor that suggested he'd dealt with plenty of neighborhood disputes. I walked him through everything, showed him my garage where the chemicals had been stored, and explained Deborah's admission that morning. "Do you have proof of purchase for these chemicals?" he asked. "Yeah, invoices from my supplier. Everything was legitimate, bought through my company's vendor account. And she admitted to taking them this morning right in my driveway. My neighbor Rick saw her car here yesterday afternoon when I was at work. She specifically said she confiscated them." Officer Chen made notes. "Technically, this is theft. However, if she's claiming some kind of HOA authority and she hasn't damaged or disposed of the property yet, it gets complicated. Have you asked for them back formally? Just this morning. She refused to tell me where they are. Here's what I recommend. Send her a formal written demand for return of property. Give her 24 hours to comply. If she doesn't, file a formal complaint and we can pursue charges. Also, document everything. Record conversations if Ohio allows it. We're a one-party consent state, right? Correct. You can record conversations you're part of without the other person's knowledge. Keep any emails, texts, everything." After Officer Chen left, I spent the next hour drafting a formal demand letter. I kept it professional and factual, cited the items taken, the date and approximate time they were removed, and demanded their return within 24 hours. I sent it via email with read receipt and also printed a copy to hand deliver to her house. Deborah lived in one of the larger homes in the development, a 2-story colonial that she and her husband Frank had customized beyond the standard builder model. Frank was rarely around, some kind of sales job that kept him traveling. I'd spoken to him maybe twice in 3 years. I rang the doorbell and waited. Deborah answered, already frowning when she saw me. "This is harassment, Stephen. This is a formal demand for return of my property." I held out the letter. "I'm also documenting this interaction." I'd started recording on my phone before approaching the door. She glanced at the phone in my hand, her eyes narrowing. "You're recording me at my own home. I'm documenting the delivery of a legal notice. Ohio is one-party consent. Do you want this letter or not?" She snatched it from my hand and started reading. Her face reddened as she went through it. "You're threatening legal action over this. I'm requesting return of my property. If you choose not to comply, then yes, I'll pursue legal remedies. Those chemicals are dangerous. The EPA will confirm that. Then let them. But until some official authority tells me they need to be confiscated, they're my property and you had no right to take them. I have every right as HOA president to protect this community. Show me where in the bylaws it says you can enter my property and take my belongings." She crossed her arms. Section 12 clearly states the board has authority to address safety violations. Section 12 is about architectural guidelines and lawn maintenance. It says nothing about entering garages or confiscating property. I've read the entire document 3 times now. Your interpretation is incorrect. Then we'll let the police and lawyers sort it out. You have 24 hours to return my property, Deborah. I turned and left before she could respond. My hands were shaking from the adrenaline, but I felt like I'd handled it properly. The next morning, I found a bright orange violation notice stuck to my front door. According to the form, I was being fined $200 for storage of hazardous materials in violation of community safety standards, and another $100 for verbal harassment of a board member. The notice was signed by Deborah and dated that morning. I photographed it, made copies, and added it to my growing file of documentation. Then I checked my email. Deborah had responded to my demand letter with a lengthy message explaining that she'd contacted her attorney and the EPA, and that she was within her rights to confiscate dangerous materials. She claimed the chemicals were being stored at an appropriate facility, pending EPA evaluation. 24 hours came and went with no return of my property. I went back to the police station and filed a formal theft complaint against Deborah Patterson. The officer who took my statement was younger than Officer Chen, but seemed to take it seriously. "This is pretty cut and dry," he said after reviewing my documentation. "She took your property without permission, admitted to it, and is refusing to return it. That's theft. What happens now? We'll assign a detective to investigate. They'll contact Miss Patterson and get her statement. Given that you have documentation and she's admitted to taking the items, I'd expect charges to be filed. How long does that take? Depends on the detective's caseload. Could be a few days, could be a couple weeks." I left the station feeling somewhat validated but frustrated by the timeline. I needed those chemicals back, and more importantly, I needed Deborah to understand she couldn't just do whatever she wanted. That afternoon, I received a call from an unknown number. A woman identified herself as Sandra Mills from the EPA Region 5 office in Chicago. "Mr. Thornton, I'm calling regarding a complaint we received about hazardous materials storage at your residence in Columbus, Ohio." My heart sank. "What kind of complaint?" "Deborah Patterson filed a report claiming you're improperly storing industrial chemicals in a residential area." "Can you tell me about these chemicals?" I explained the whole situation, including the fact that Deborah had stolen them from my garage and was now holding them hostage. Sandra listened without interrupting. "Can you provide me with the product information? Brand name, chemical composition, everything you have?" "Absolutely. I have all the safety data sheets and purchase invoices. Email those to me at the address I'm about to give you. I need to evaluate whether there's actually a hazard situation here." I spent the next hour compiling everything and sending it to Sandra. The safety data sheets clearly showed the chemicals were commercial grade but legal for consumer use. They required proper storage away from heat sources and incompatible materials, which I'd been doing. They weren't radioactive waste or anything remotely close to what Deborah was implying. 2 days later, Sandra called back. "Mr. Thornton, I've reviewed your documentation. The materials you purchased are classified as irritants and require proper handling, but they're not illegal for residential storage when kept in appropriate containers in a well-ventilated area like a garage. You weren't in violation of any EPA regulations." Relief flooded through me. "Can you tell Deborah Patterson that? Actually, that's why I'm calling. Miss Patterson has been less than cooperative with our investigation. She initially reported these as highly toxic industrial waste, which got flagged in our system as a priority. When I contacted her to inspect the materials, she became evasive about their current location. She won't tell you where they are. She claims they're in a secure facility, but hasn't provided an address. I've explained that I need to verify the materials and their storage conditions, but she's been avoiding my calls. Do you know where she might have taken them? No idea. She's refused to tell me anything." Sandra sighed. "Here's the situation. If she's storing these chemicals improperly, especially if she's combined them with other substances or placed them in inadequate containers, that could create an actual hazard. The compounds in your de-icer can react badly with certain other chemicals." My stomach turned. "What kind of reactions?" "Depends on what they come in contact with. Could be heat generation, toxic fume release, or in worst-case scenarios, fire or explosion risk. That's why I need to inspect them." "What happens if she keeps refusing?" "Then I'll have to involve local authorities and potentially pursue charges for obstruction of an EPA investigation. But I'd rather not escalate unless necessary." After we hung up, I sat at my kitchen table trying to figure out my next move. Deborah had taken something that wasn't hers, lied to federal authorities about it, and was now potentially creating the exact hazardous situation she'd claimed to be preventing. My phone rang again. "Detective Maria Gonzalez from Columbus PD. Mr. Thornton, I've been assigned to your theft case. I've reviewed your documentation and attempted to contact Miss Patterson. She's retained an attorney and is refusing to provide information about the location of your property. The EPA can't find them either. They need to inspect them. I'm aware. I spoke with Sandra Mills this morning. This is getting complicated. Miss Patterson's attorney is claiming qualified immunity under HOA authority. That's nonsense. She stole from me. I agree, and I don't think the immunity argument will hold up, but it means this is going to take longer to resolve. I'm going to request a search warrant for her property to see if the chemicals are there. How long will that take? I should be able to get one within a week, assuming the judge agrees we have probable cause. In the meantime, keep documenting everything." That Saturday, I received a certified letter from Deborah's attorney, a firm called Whitmore and Associates. The letter claimed I was in violation of multiple HOA covenants, demanded I pay the $300 fine, and threatened additional legal action if I continued to harass and defame Deborah Patterson. I scanned the letter and forwarded it to Detective Gonzalez. Then I did something I should have done earlier. I started reaching out to other neighbors who'd had problems with Deborah. Rick Davidson was first. He came over that evening with a folder full of his own HOA violation notices, some dating back 2 years. "She tried to fine me $1,500 for painting my shutters the wrong shade of gray," he said. Wrong shade. I had to get color swatches and measurements proving they were within the approved range before she backed off. "Did she ever take anything from your property?" "Not took, but she had a contractor trim my trees without asking. Said they were overhanging the sidewalk by 3 inches. Cost me $200 in damages when they screwed it up." "Did you report it?" I tried, but nothing came of it. "She's got the whole board under her thumb." The other 2 members just rubber stamp whatever she wants. I contacted 4 other neighbors over the next few days. Everyone had stories. Deborah had entered Emily Richardson's backyard to photograph her garden gnomes, which she claimed violated the tasteful decoration clause. She'd reported Tom Webster to code enforcement for parking his work van in his driveway overnight. She'd even tried to force the Johnsons to remove their basketball hoop because it was visible from the street. But nobody else reported her actually taking property. I seemed to be special in that regard. On Wednesday, Detective Gonzalez called with news. "I got the warrant. We're executing it tomorrow morning at 8. Do you want to be present?" "Absolutely." I barely slept that night. At 7:30 the next morning, I drove to Deborah's house and parked down the street. 3 police cars arrived right at 8. Detective Gonzalez knocked on the door. Deborah answered in a bathrobe, looking shocked. I couldn't hear the conversation from my car, but I saw Deborah gesture angrily and try to close the door. Detective Gonzalez held up the warrant. After a few minutes, Deborah stepped aside and let them in. The search took about 90 minutes. Officers checked the house, the garage, and a large storage shed in the backyard. I watched them carry out several items in evidence bags, but I couldn't tell what they were from that distance. Finally, Detective Gonzalez walked over to my car and knocked on the window. I rolled it down. "They're not here," she said. "What? Where are they?" We found documentation in her home office. Looks like she took them to a commercial storage facility out on Route 161. "We're heading there now. Want to follow?" The storage facility was called Secure Space Self-Storage, one of those big complexes with hundreds of identical garage-style units. The manager, a heavy-set guy named Dale, met us at the office. "Unit 237, he said after Detective Gonzalez explained the situation. "Rented to a Deborah Patterson about 2 weeks ago. Paid for 3 months up front in cash. We need to open it," Detective Gonzalez said, showing the warrant. Dale grabbed a master key and led us through the maze of units. Unit 237 was in the back corner, a 10 by 10 space with an orange door. He unlocked it and rolled it up. The smell hit us immediately. Chemical, sharp, wrong. Inside the unit, my 3 containers of de-icer sat on the concrete floor, but they weren't alone. Deborah had apparently collected other chemicals from God knows where. There were paint thinners, bottles of bleach, containers of ammonia, old pesticides, and various other substances, many in damaged or leaking containers. "Jesus Christ," Detective Gonzalez muttered. She immediately pulled out her phone. "Everyone back up. We need hazmat out here now." Dale's eyes went wide. "What is all that?" "A disaster waiting to happen," I said, recognizing several combinations that definitely shouldn't be stored together. Detective Gonzalez made several calls. Within 20 minutes, the fire department's hazmat team arrived, followed by Sandra Mills from the EPA. Sandra took one look inside the unit and her professional composure cracked. "This is incredibly dangerous," she said. "Who put all this together?" "Deborah Patterson," Detective Gonzalez said. "The same person who reported Mr. Thornton here for improperly storing chemicals." Sandra stared at the mixture of substances. "Several of these are creating toxic fumes right now. That's why we smell it. And if I'm seeing what I think I'm seeing, there's at least 3 different combinations that could cause fires or explosions. This entire unit needs to be evacuated and properly cleaned." The hazmat team spent the next 3 hours carefully removing and cataloging every container in the unit. My de-icer containers were among the first pulled out. Sandra examined them and nodded to me. "These are fine. They're exactly what you said they were, properly sealed, no damage. Everything else in there, though, that's a federal incident." "What does that mean?" I asked. "It means miss." Patterson has created an illegal hazardous waste storage situation. She's combined incompatible chemicals, stored them improperly, and created a significant public safety risk. That's multiple violations of federal environmental law, not to mention state regulations. What happens now? I'm filing a formal enforcement action with the EPA. Depending on the investigation, she could face civil penalties or criminal charges. This is serious, Mr. Thornton. Someone could have been hurt or killed if these materials had reacted. Detective Gonzalez walked over. The fire chief wants to press charges for reckless endangerment. We're also adding evidence tampering since she hid these after taking them from your property. The theft charges stand as well. Will I get my chemicals back, eventually? They'll need to be held as evidence for a while, but since the EPA confirmed they're legal and weren't the hazard, yeah, you'll get them back. I felt a strange mixture of vindication and shock. This had escalated so far beyond what I'd imagined when I first noticed my chemicals missing. The news spread through Meadowbrook Estates like wildfire. By that evening, everyone knew about the hazmat situation at the storage facility. My phone kept buzzing with calls and texts from neighbors. Rick came over that night with pizza and beer. Dude, you're a legend. Nobody's been able to stop Deborah's crazy for years, and you got her arrested in like 2 weeks. She's not arrested yet, I said. Give it time. The HOA Facebook group is losing their minds. People are calling for her removal from the board. The Meadowbrook Estates Facebook group had indeed exploded. Over 100 comments on a post about Deborah's chemical storage incident, as people were calling it. Some defended her, saying she meant well and made a mistake. But most were sharing their own stories of her overreach and calling for accountability. On Friday afternoon, I received a call from an attorney named James Mitchell. He explained that several neighbors had retained him to pursue action against Deborah and the HOA board for various grievances, and they wanted to include my case. We're looking at a pattern of abuse of authority, James explained. Your case is the most serious, but combined with everyone else's complaints, we can make a strong argument for complete board removal and restructuring. I just want my property back and Deborah to leave me alone. You'll get that. But we can also help make sure this doesn't happen to anyone else. The HOA has insurance that covers board member misconduct. We can pursue damages on behalf of everyone who's been impacted. I agreed to let him include my case. Over the weekend, James collected statements from 11 different homeowners who'd experienced problems with Deborah's leadership. Monday morning brought another call from Sandra Mills. Mr. Thornton, I wanted to update you. The EPA has completed its investigation. We're pursuing criminal charges against Ms. Patterson for improper disposal and storage of hazardous waste, making false statements to federal investigators, and obstruction of an official investigation. Criminal charges, not just fines. The situation was serious enough to warrant criminal prosecution. She knowingly created a hazardous condition after being warned by multiple authorities. She also lied repeatedly about the location and nature of the materials. That's not something we take lightly. What kind of penalties are we talking about? Federal environmental crimes can carry significant prison time and fines. I can't predict what a judge will do, but she's looking at potentially several years if convicted on all counts. The reality of it hit me. What started as a dispute over de-icer had snowballed into federal criminal charges. Part of me felt guilty, but then I remembered that Deborah had created this mess entirely on her own. I just wanted my property back. Tuesday evening, I answered my door to find Deborah's husband Frank standing there. He looked exhausted, his eyes red and his clothes rumpled. "Stephen, can we talk?" he asked. I considered saying no but stepped aside to let him in. Frank had never done anything to me, and he looked like he was barely holding it together. "I'm not here to make excuses," Frank said, sitting heavily on my couch. "Deborah screwed up. She screwed up really bad, and I'm trying to understand how it got this far. Why did she take my chemicals in the first place?" Frank rubbed his face. "Honestly, I think she was spiraling. The HOA thing, it started as something to keep her busy when I was traveling, but it became an obsession. She spent hours every day driving around looking for violations, reading legal documents, arguing on the Facebook group. I tried to tell her she needed to step back, but she said people were counting on her to maintain property values. She broke into my garage, Frank. I know. And she created that nightmare at the storage unit. The lawyers explained it all to me. Stephen, I'm not asking you to drop charges or anything. She needs to face consequences. I just wanted you to hear from me that I'm sorry. She wasn't always like this. What's going to happen with her?" "She's been formally charged. Federal arraignment is next week. Her lawyer says she'll probably take a plea deal. The EPA has her dead to rights on the environmental charges, and the theft and evidence tampering charges from the police are solid too. Best case, she's looking at probation and huge fines. Worst case, prison time. How are you dealing with it?" Frank laughed bitterly. "I'm putting the house up for sale. Even if she avoids prison, we can't afford the legal bills and EPA penalties. And honestly, I can't live here anymore. Everyone knows what she did." After Frank left, I sat in my living room feeling strange. I'd been angry at Deborah, rightfully so, but seeing her life completely implode was sobering. Then again, she'd brought it all on herself through her own actions. The following week, an emergency HOA meeting was called. Over 60 homeowners showed up, packed into the community clubhouse. Deborah obviously wasn't there. The other two board members, Jennifer Wright and Harold Kim, looked uncomfortable at the front of the room. James Mitchell, the attorney representing multiple homeowners, stood up and addressed the crowd. "We're here tonight to discuss the board's handling of various issues over the past several years, culminating in the criminal actions of President Patterson. I'm representing a group of homeowners who believe the entire board should resign and face potential civil liability for enabling this behavior." Jennifer tried to defend herself. "We didn't know what Deborah was doing with those chemicals. That was entirely her own action." "But you approved hundreds of questionable violation notices," James countered. "You rubber-stamped every fine and penalty she proposed. You enabled a pattern of harassment and overreach that violated homeowners' rights." The crowd erupted in agreement. For the next hour, people shared their stories. The meeting got heated, with several homeowners demanding immediate board resignation. Eventually, Jennifer and Harold agreed to step down, effective immediately. A vote was held to install an interim board of 3 new members who committed to reviewing all pending violations and fees, and working with an attorney to revise the HOA bylaws to prevent future abuse. I left the meeting feeling like maybe something good could come from this mess after all. Deborah's arraignment happened on a cold Wednesday in early December. I wasn't required to attend, but Detective Gonzalez invited me to observe if I wanted. I decided to go, curious to see how it would unfold. The federal courthouse in Columbus was an imposing building downtown. I went through security and found my way to the courtroom. Deborah sat at the defense table with her attorney, looking smaller somehow than she had when she'd confronted me in my driveway. She wore a conservative suit and barely moved throughout the proceedings. The charges were read out. Improper storage and disposal of hazardous materials, making false statements to federal investigators, obstruction of justice, and several other counts I didn't fully understand. The state also had charges pending for theft, evidence tampering, and reckless endangerment. Deborah pled not guilty to all charges. Her attorney argued for release on her own recognizance. The prosecutor objected, citing flight risk and the seriousness of the charges. The judge set bail at $50,000 and scheduled a preliminary hearing for January. I left the courthouse feeling unsettled. The legal system was moving forward, but it all felt surreal. My chemicals were finally returned to me in mid-December. Detective Gonzalez called to let me know I could pick them up from the evidence facility. The containers were exactly as I'd left them, properly sealed and labeled. I loaded them into my truck and drove home. It had been nearly a month since this all started. Winter had fully arrived, and I finally needed to actually use the de-icer. I spread it on my driveway and walkway, watching it work exactly as intended, melting away ice and providing safe passage. Such a simple thing that had caused such chaos. The preliminary hearing in January was where things really fell apart for Deborah. The EPA presented evidence of the chemical combinations found in the storage unit. An expert witness testified about the potential dangers, including the risk of toxic gas release and possible explosions. Photographs of the scene showed just how recklessly Deborah had stored everything. The state presented evidence from the theft case. My recorded conversations, witness statements from neighbors, the documentation trail showing Deborah's admission of taking the chemicals and her subsequent refusal to return them or disclose their location. Deborah's attorney tried to argue that she'd been acting in good faith to protect the community. The judge wasn't buying it. "Miss Patterson," the judge said, "even if we accept your claimed motivation, your actions created exactly the dangerous situation you purported to prevent. You removed legally stored chemicals and combined them with other hazardous materials in an unventilated storage unit. You then lied to federal investigators about their location. This goes far beyond a simple misunderstanding." By the end of January, Deborah's attorney had negotiated a plea deal. She would plead guilty to 3 federal charges and 2 state charges in exchange for the rest being dropped. The sentencing recommendation was 18 months in federal prison, 3 years of probation, community service, and fines totaling over $75,000 to cover EPA cleanup costs and restitution. The sentencing hearing was scheduled for March. In the meantime, Deborah was under house arrest with an ankle monitor. Frank had indeed put their house up for sale, and a "for sale" sign stood in their front yard like a monument to everything that had happened. Life in Meadowbrook Estates slowly returned to normal. The new interim HOA board started actually reviewing the bylaws and removing ridiculous provisions. Violation notices and fines dropped dramatically. The Facebook group became less of a battleground and more of an actual community forum. Rick and I became good friends through the whole ordeal. We started having weekly poker games with some other neighbors who'd been caught up in Deborah's reign of terror. Emily Richardson, who'd been cited for her garden gnomes, brought cookies. Tom Webster, the guy with the work van, brought beer. We'd sit around my dining room table, playing cards and swapping stories. "I still can't believe she created a chemical bomb in a storage unit," Emily said one night in February. "Like, who does that?" "Someone who was so convinced she was right that she stopped thinking rationally," Tom suggested. "She got so wrapped up in being the authority that she couldn't see how crazy her actions were. The scary part is how long she got away with it," Rick added. "If Stephen hadn't pushed back, she'd probably still be terrorizing the neighborhood." I didn't feel like a hero, though people kept treating me like one. I just wanted my property back and refused to be bullied. The rest had spiraled out from there. James Mitchell's civil case against the former HOA board moved forward as well. In February, the HOA's insurance company offered a settlement to avoid prolonged litigation. Every homeowner who'd been improperly fined or cited would receive compensation. The amounts weren't huge, but it was something. My portion was $800, covering my fines and legal fees. Rick got $600 for his tree trimming incident. Emily got $500 for her gnome violation. 43 homeowners total received payments from the settlement. March arrived with warmer weather and the sentencing hearing. I attended again, sitting in the back of the courtroom. Frank was there, sitting alone several rows ahead of me. Deborah's parents had come from somewhere, an elderly couple who looked devastated. The prosecutor went first, laying out the seriousness of Deborah's actions. Your Honor, the defendant created a significant public safety hazard through her reckless actions. She then compounded this by lying to federal investigators and obstructing their work. This wasn't a momentary lapse in judgment, but a sustained pattern of illegal behavior over several weeks. Deborah's attorney presented character witnesses and letters of support. Some HOA members who still backed her testified about her community involvement and claimed she'd been trying to help. Her therapist testified that Deborah had been suffering from anxiety and depression, which may have impaired her judgment. Then Deborah herself spoke. She stood at the podium, trembling slightly. Your Honor, I know I made terrible mistakes. I thought I was protecting my community, but I let my fear and need for control override common sense and the law. I violated Mr. Thornton's rights. I created a dangerous situation. I lied to investigators because I was scared of what I'd done. I'm deeply sorry for all of it. I'm sorry to Mr. Thornton, to my neighbors, to my family, and to this court. She sat back down, crying. I felt a complicated mix of emotions. Her apology seemed genuine, but it didn't change what she'd done or the chaos she'd caused. The judge took about 10 minutes to review documents before speaking. Miss Patterson, I've considered everything presented here. Your actions were serious and put people at risk. However, I also believe you've shown genuine remorse and have no prior criminal history. I'm going to follow the prosecution's recommendation with some modifications. She sentenced Deborah to 12 months in federal prison, followed by 3 years of supervised probation. The fines and restitution remained the same. Deborah would have to report to begin her sentence in 30 days. I left the courthouse feeling like the book was finally closing on this chapter. Justice had been served, even if it felt harsh seeing someone's life destroyed over what started as a dispute about de-icer. Frank stopped me in the parking lot. Stephen, wait. I turned. He looked older than he had a few months ago. I just wanted to say thank you, he said. For what? For not letting her get away with it. I know that sounds weird, but she needed to hit bottom. Maybe now she can get actual help and figure out what went so wrong. If you just let it go, she would have kept escalating until something even worse happened. How are you doing? I asked. House sold last week. I'm moving to Cleveland for a job change. Fresh start, you know. Deborah and I are divorcing. I'll support her through this, but I can't stay married to her. Not after everything. We shook hands and Frank walked away. I never saw him again. April brought real spring weather. Deborah reported to federal prison in Alderson, West Virginia, where she'd serve her sentence. The for sale sign came down from their house, and new owners moved in a few weeks later. A young couple with a baby who seemed friendly and normal. The new HOA board finalized revised bylaws in May. They were reasonable, focusing on actual community standards rather than petty control. Enforcement would require board votes rather than unilateral decisions. And most importantly, there were clear appeals processes and restrictions on board authority. Life in Meadowbrook Estates became genuinely pleasant. Without the constant threat of violation notices and fines, people relaxed. Neighborhoods are supposed to be communities, not police states, and we were finally becoming the former. I ran into Sandra Mills from the EPA one last time in June. She was doing a follow-up inspection at the storage facility to ensure proper cleanup had been completed. We grabbed coffee afterward. "Your case turned into a training example," she told me. "We use it to show investigators how improper chemical storage can happen in unexpected contexts. Most people think of illegal dumping as companies or criminals. They don't expect HOA presidents creating hazmat scenes." Has anything like this happened before? Not quite like this. We get complaints about residential chemical storage sometimes, usually legitimate concerns. But someone actually stealing legal chemicals and creating a dangerous situation while claiming to be preventing one. That was a first for me. I still can't believe it got so out of hand. People do strange things when they convince themselves they're righteous. Miss Patterson thought she was protecting her community. She built up this narrative where you were the villain and she was the hero. When reality didn't match that narrative, she doubled down instead of admitting she was wrong. We finished our coffee and went our separate ways. I thought about what Sandra had said. It was a good explanation for Deborah's psychology, though it didn't excuse her actions. Summer came. I used my de-icer containers to store other garage supplies, the chemicals themselves long since used up on various ice storms over the winter. The containers sat on my shelf, mundane and harmless, a reminder of the absurd drama they'd sparked. Rick and I were grilling burgers one Saturday afternoon when Emily walked over with her garden gnomes prominently displayed in her front yard. She'd added more since the HOA drama ended, creating an elaborate scene with little bridges and mushroom houses. "Have you heard anything about Deborah?" she asked. "Frank sent me an email last month. She's doing okay, apparently. Working in the prison library, attending therapy, keeping her head down. Think she's learned her lesson? I hope so. Nobody wins when someone's life implodes like that." "But she did it to herself," Rick pointed out. "You just stood up for your rights." He was right. I hadn't set out to destroy anyone's life. I'd simply refused to be bullied and let the legal system do its job. Deborah's consequences flowed from her own choices. The one-year anniversary of finding my chemicals missing arrived in November. Meadowbrook Estates had completely transformed. The new HOA board was functional but unobtrusive. Neighbors helped each other instead of reporting each other. It felt like an actual community. I was spreading regular store-bought de-icer on my driveway. Ironic after everything that happened with the industrial stuff. When my new neighbor Carol from Deborah's old house walked over. "Stephen, right?" she asked. "I've been meaning to introduce myself properly. I'm Carol Thompson." "Nice to meet you officially. How are you settling in?" "Great, actually. This is such a friendly neighborhood. Everyone's been really welcoming." I smiled, thinking about how different her experience was from what it could have been. "Yeah, it's a good place." "I heard there was some drama with the previous HOA leadership. Something about the woman who lived in our house. Long story. But it's all resolved now. You don't have to worry about it." Carol smiled. "Good to hear. Well, I just wanted to say hi. We're having a holiday party next month if you'd like to come." After she left, I finished spreading the de-icer and stood looking at my house. 3 years I'd lived here, and the last year had been the most dramatic of my life. But things were good now. Better than good, actually. My phone buzzed with a text from Rick. "Poker tonight. Tom's bringing his famous chili." I replied that I'd be there and went inside to warm up. The house was quiet and comfortable. My garage held my car, some tools and supplies, all legally and properly stored. No HOA president would be confiscating anything ever again. December brought Deborah's first parole hearing. She was denied, which wasn't surprising given she'd only served 8 months of her 12-month sentence. She'd be eligible again in 4 months. Frank sent me a brief email about it. He said Deborah was doing well in prison, that she'd completed several educational programs and was genuinely working on herself. He thought she might actually emerge from this experience a better person. I hoped he was right. The holidays came and went. I attended Carol's party and had a good time. The neighborhood felt alive with lights and decorations. No violation notices about improper holiday displays or lights visible from the street. Just people enjoying themselves. On New Year's Eve, Rick hosted a party at his house. About 20 neighbors showed up, including most of the poker game regulars. At midnight, we all counted down together and toasted the new year. To second chances, Emily said, raising her glass. And to standing up for yourself, Tom added, nodding at me. We clinked glasses and drank. The party continued for another few hours, full of laughter and conversation. I drove home around 2 in the morning, happy and tired. Parking in my driveway, I looked at my house one more time. A simple suburban home in a simple subdivision in Columbus, Ohio. Nothing special, except it was mine and I'd fought to keep it that way. The whole situation with Deborah seemed surreal now, like something from a movie rather than real life. But it had been real. And I'd learned some important lessons from it. Stand up for yourself when you're in the right. Document everything. Don't let bullies intimidate you into submission. And sometimes, enforcing accountability is the kindest thing you can do, even if it doesn't feel like it at the time. February arrived with Deborah's release from prison. She'd served her 12 months and was now beginning her probation period. Frank's updates said she'd moved to a different city entirely, starting fresh somewhere else. I was glad I wouldn't run into her around town. The civil case James Mitchell had brought resulted in some changes beyond just the settlement payments. The HOA was required to undergo governance training and implement new oversight procedures. Board meetings had to be properly noticed and recorded. Finances had to be transparently reported. It was all common sense stuff that should have been there from the beginning. Spring came again, completing the full cycle. The trees bloomed, grass grew, and life continued. I'd become somewhat of an unofficial advisor to the new HOA board, having learned more about HOA law than I ever wanted to know during the legal proceedings. I helped review proposed changes to bylaws and offered input on enforcement procedures. It wasn't a role I'd sought, but I was happy to help prevent future problems. The whole experience had taught me that homeowners associations can serve legitimate purposes, but they need checks and balances just like any other organization with authority. One warm April evening, I was washing my car in the driveway when a sedan pulled up. A woman got out, and it took me a moment to recognize Deborah. She looked different, thinner, with shorter hair and no makeup. She approached hesitantly. "Stephen, I know I probably shouldn't be here," she said. "I'm violating the terms of my probation by being in this neighborhood, but I needed to apologize to you in person." I set down my sponge. "Okay. What I did to you was wrong on every level. I violated your privacy, stole your property, lied about you to authorities, and created a dangerous situation, all while claiming to be protecting people. I was completely out of control, and you were the one who finally stopped me. I just wanted my chemicals back. I know. And you had every right to them. I've spent a lot of time in therapy trying to understand why I acted the way I did. There are reasons, explanations, but no excuses. I hurt you and a lot of other people because I needed to feel important and in control. How are you doing now?" "Better. I'm working at a library in Dayton, living in an apartment trying to rebuild my life. Frank and I are divorced. I lost almost everything, but I'm getting help and working on myself. That's good. I know my apology doesn't fix anything, but I needed you to hear it. You didn't deserve any of what I put you through. She turned to leave, then paused. For what it's worth, thank you for not letting me get away with it. I needed to face consequences or I never would have changed. Deborah got back in her car and drove away. I stood there for a moment, processing the encounter. Her apology had seemed genuine, and I was glad she was getting help. But I also knew that her consequences had been appropriate for her actions. I finished washing my car as the sun set, painting the sky orange and pink. Meadowbrook Estates looked peaceful in the evening light. Kids played in yards, people walked dogs, couples strolled together. A normal neighborhood doing normal neighborhood things. That's all I'd ever wanted. To live my life, maintain my property, be a decent neighbor. The fact that such simple goals had led to federal charges and someone going to prison was absurd. But sometimes absurd things happen, and you just have to deal with them. The poker game that night was at my house. Rick, Tom, Emily, and a few others showed up with snacks and drinks. We played cards, told stories, and laughed. At one point, Emily asked if I'd heard about Deborah visiting. News travels fast, I said. Small neighborhood. Carol saw her. How did it go? She apologized. Seemed genuine. I think she's actually trying to change. Good for her, Tom said, dealing another hand. But she earned everything that happened to her. Agreed, I said, picking up my cards. But I'm glad she's moving forward. We played late into the night, friends enjoying each other's company in a community that had been through turmoil and come out stronger. The whole experience with Deborah and the HOA had brought people together in an unexpected way. Shared adversity creating genuine bonds. Summer approached with warm weather and clear skies. The neighborhood pool opened, kids started playing outside later, and grills fired up on weekends. I settled into a comfortable routine of work, friends, and home maintenance. The drama of the previous year felt like ancient history. In June, the new HOA board held its annual meeting. The attendance was the highest in years, with over 70 homeowners showing up. The meeting was professional, focused, and productive. A far cry from the contentious gatherings under Deborah's leadership. During the open forum portion, one of the newer residents who'd moved in after all the drama asked about governance improvements. The board president, a retired teacher named Margaret Sullivan, explained all the changes implemented over the past year. We learned some hard lessons, Margaret said. Power without accountability creates problems. We've put systems in place to ensure board members can't act unilaterally and homeowners have clear paths to challenge decisions. Our goal is to maintain property values and community standards while respecting individual rights. People applauded. It was a simple statement of what HOAs should be doing, revolutionary only because it had been absent for so long. After the meeting, Margaret approached me. Stephen, I wanted to thank you again for everything you went through last year. Your situation prompted all these positive changes. I just didn't want to be pushed around. Well, your willingness to stand up made a difference. A lot of people would have just paid the fines and moved on. Maybe, but I'm stubborn. Margaret laughed. Stubborn in a good way. We need more homeowners willing to hold leadership accountable. As summer progressed, I reflected on everything that had happened. 14 months from finding my chemicals missing to now, sitting in my backyard on a July evening, grilling dinner and watching fireflies. So much had changed, yet in many ways, everything was back to how it should have been all along. The story of Deborah taking my de-icing chemicals, the EPA investigation, and her eventual conviction had become neighborhood legend. New residents heard about it during welcome parties. Kids told distorted versions to each other. It was the defining event in Meadowbrook Estate's recent history. But for me, it was just something that happened. An unfortunate series of events triggered by one person's inability to respect boundaries. I'd responded appropriately, the system had worked, and justice had been served. Life moved on. August brought news that Deborah had completed her probation requirements successfully. She'd paid her fines, done her community service, attended all required therapy sessions, and stayed out of trouble. Frank's final update said she seemed to be doing well in Dayton, building a quiet life away from positions of authority or conflict. I was genuinely happy to hear it. I'd never wanted to destroy her life, just protect my own rights. The fact that she was recovering and moving forward was a good outcome. The second winter since the whole incident arrived. I bought normal store-bought de-icer and kept it in clearly labeled containers in my garage. Overkill, probably, but I had no desire to repeat the previous drama. Every time I spread it on my driveway, I thought about those industrial chemicals and everything they'd inadvertently set in motion. Life in Meadowbrook Estates continued peacefully. The HOA functioned as it should, addressing legitimate issues without overreach. Neighbors got along well, looking out for each other while respecting privacy. Property values remained stable. Everything worked. On a cold evening in December, almost exactly 2 years after finding my chemicals missing, I sat in my living room with a cup of coffee and thought about writing down the whole story. Not for publication or anything, just to have a record of what happened. I pulled out my laptop and started typing. The details were still clear in my mind. Finding the containers missing, Deborah's admission in my driveway, calling the police, the EPA investigation, the hazmat situation at the storage unit, the criminal charges, the trial, the sentencing. All of it flowing from such a simple starting point. It took several evenings to write it all out. When I finished, I had a document detailing everything from start to finish. I saved it to my computer and backed it up to cloud storage. Maybe someday it would be useful, or maybe it would just sit there, a digital monument to an absurd chapter of my life. Rick called to invite me to a New Year's party. Same group as the previous year, same location at his house. I accepted, looking forward to it. These people had become genuine friends through shared experience. The party was fun, full of the easy camaraderie that comes from knowing people well. At midnight, we toasted again. To boring, peaceful years ahead, Tom said, and everyone laughed and agreed. We drank to that sentiment, hoping for nothing but normalcy going forward. As the party wound down and people headed home, Rick pulled me aside. "You know, when you first moved here, I never thought you'd be the one to take down the HOA dictatorship," he said, slightly drunk but sincere. "I didn't take anything down. I just stood up for myself." "Same thing, man. Sometimes that's all it takes, one person refusing to back down." Driving home that night, I thought about Rick's words. Maybe he was right. Maybe all significant changes start with one person deciding enough is enough. My refusal to accept Deborah's theft had triggered everything else. The new year brought stability and routine. Work was busy but good. The neighborhood remained peaceful. I dated someone for a few months, but it didn't work out. Life happened in its normal way, full of small pleasures and minor frustrations. In March, 3 years after everything started, I received an unexpected letter. It was from Deborah, postmarked from Dayton. "Dear Stephen, I hope this letter finds you well. I'm writing to let you know I've completed all requirements of my probation and am officially finished with the legal system. I wanted to update you and thank you one more time. Being held accountable, while painful, was the best thing that could have happened to me. I've learned to respect boundaries, accept when I'm wrong, and understand that control isn't the same as leadership. I have a good job now, working with a nonprofit literacy program. I have friends. I have therapy. I have a life that's mine, built on being a better person. I'll never forget what I did to you and others in Meadowbrook Estates. I carry that knowledge with me as a reminder of who I don't want to be. I hope you're doing well and that the neighborhood is thriving. Thank you for being unwilling to let me get away with my behavior. Sincerely, Deborah. I read the letter twice, then filed it with my other documentation from the case. It was a nice closure, confirmation that the whole ordeal had ultimately led to positive change, even if it came through difficult means. Spring arrived with its usual renewal. Trees bloomed, grass greened, and the neighborhood came alive with activity. I worked in my yard, catching up with neighbors, living my life. The de-icing chemical saga was firmly in the past, a story to tell occasionally but not something that defined my present. In April, the HOA board asked if I'd consider running for a position in the next election. I politely declined. I'd learned plenty about HOA governance but had no desire for that responsibility. I was happy to help informally, but didn't want an official role. Margaret understood. Can't blame you. You've already done more than your share for this community. The years rolled forward. Meadowbrook Estates continued its transformation into a genuinely pleasant place to live. People moved in and out, kids grew up, life happened. The story of Deborah and the hazardous chemicals became something older residents told newer ones, often embellished but fundamentally true. I stayed in my house, comfortable and content. I'd stood up for myself when it mattered, seen justice served, and watched a community transform. Not bad outcomes from refusing to let someone steal my property. The industrial de-icing chemicals that started everything were long gone, used up or disposed of properly. I sometimes wondered if I should have just let Deborah take them, if avoiding the conflict would have been easier. But I knew the answer. Easier in the short term, maybe, but ultimately enabling destructive behavior. Standing up had been right. Pursuing justice had been right. Holding someone accountable for their actions had been right, even when it was uncomfortable and time-consuming and stressful. 5 years after the initial incident, Meadowbrook Estates was thriving. Property values had increased. The neighborhood won some local award for community involvement. People genuinely liked living here. All the drama with Deborah felt like ancient history, important to those who'd lived through it, but increasingly irrelevant to daily life. I was grilling dinner on a summer evening when Carol walked over with her son, now 5 years old and obsessed with learning about everything. "Stephen, Jason wants to know about your garage," she said, looking amused. "I told him to ask you himself." The boy looked up at me seriously. "Do you have any dangerous chemicals in there?" I laughed, understanding where this came from. Carol must have told him an age-appropriate version of the story. "Nope, just regular stuff. Car supplies, tools, things like that." "Good," Jason said solemnly. "Dangerous chemicals should be stored properly." "That's absolutely right," I agreed, struggling not to laugh. After they left, I stood by my grill, smiling. The story had become a teaching moment for children, a cautionary tale about following rules and respecting property. Not a bad legacy, all things considered. The years continued their march. I settled deeper into my life and home. The drama with Deborah and the HOA faded further into memory, important but past. Meadowbrook Estates remained a good place to live, with functional governance and friendly neighbors. Sometimes I thought about those de-icing chemicals and everything they'd set in motion. Such a mundane product causing such extraordinary consequences. But that was life. Small things could cascade into big events. A person refusing to be pushed around could change an entire community. Standing up for yourself mattered. I never regretted my choices in handling the situation. I'd done what was right, legally and ethically. Deborah had faced appropriate consequences for her actions. The system had worked, justice had been served, and life had moved on for everyone involved. That was the real ending. Not dramatic or Hollywood-worthy, but satisfying in its own way. A problem addressed, consequences applied, lessons learned, improvements made, and normal life resumed. Sometimes that's exactly how things should work out.